What's up, everybody? Miss Lynch here. We are on the second half of chapter 17. So, I'm just going to pick up where I left off. All right. Last time, our first half of the chapter ends with politics, religion, and memory. So, we were talking about the way the South is remembered, the memory of the Civil War, the lost cause. All right. And I said that I would end there because our chapter then kind of changes tone a little bit. And that's where we are. All right, we are on redrawing the boundaries. So lots of stuff happening in the U.S. during this time. And in addition to everything that we're talking about, there is a huge influx of immigration during the late 1800s, all right? So this last decade specifically, there were 3.5 million immigrants that came over, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe at this point in time. And many our immigrants are viewed as being inferior by native-born Americans, all right, which we'll definitely get into that more. This is seen very early on in the labor movement, so our labor organizations kind of draw that line over who's allowed, native-born versus immigrant, all of that. But so this really becomes a conversation because during this 10-year period, like I said, 3.5 million people come over, all right? So it's very noticeable to everyone, regardless of how, you viewed immigration. It's 3.5 million people, that's a lot of people. It's very evident, all right? Okay. This kind of plays off of some of the feelings that were going on in the South. But so various suggestions were made by nativists to eliminate immigrants' ability to vote. Like I said, common theme during this time, people wanting to limit other people's rights, basically. All right. We saw in the part of the video that we actually got to watch, in Ken Burns' documentary, the image of Chinese immigrants during this time, so specifically on the West Coast, going back to the railroad and the construction of all of that. But so there is the Chinese Exclusion Act that's passed in 1882, which barred Chinese immigrants from entering the States. And, well, anyway, so as a result of that, Asian Americans are required to carry identification, so government issued IDs on my book. And so this is the first time that photos were used as identification, all right? And if you have your book, so we are on 529. 529 if you are in the 5th edition, I'm guessing, and 525 if you have the 6th. So this is Anna May Wong's ID. So you can see that this is an example of what those IDs looked like. This is later, 1924. But anyway, so this begins then, all right? Okay, still looking at labor, which ties into immigration. But there's the creation of the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. And let's see. So they reflected this shift away from a broader message. So our populists, I said that they were just going out and they were talking to farmers, and then that included factory workers, miners, okay? But so that's the first push of the labor movement, is that broad approach. So now, with groups like the AFL, they begin focusing on more limited goals, baby steps, if you will. So yeah, getting 8-hour work days, overtime, fire exits, which we'll get into our next chapter. I think that's chapter 19. But so just safer working conditions, but smaller goals, okay? And then this last point plays off of what I had said in regards to anti-immigrant sentiment. But so during the 1890s, the labor movement became less and less inclusive. Like I said, 3.5 million people migrate. This is very much seen in the labor movement as those individuals who are migrating come over and need work, all right? Okay, so, I guess I didn't talk about temperance before, but I'm going to talk about it now. All right, so 1890s is also referred to at times as the women's era because a lot of changes were happening. You know, this kind of ties into the populism movement of the era, just organizing, people organizing for better situations, all right? Yeah, all right. But so changes in the women's movement during this time reflected a combination of expanding activities and narrowing boundaries, which that's so cryptic. Why did I put that? I guess our narrowing boundaries, that just reflects on kind of all of what I've been saying of just rights being picked at in different capacities. But anyway, so there's the organization of different women's groups that pops up during this time. A lot of social reform, a lot of discussions about temperance, and really trying to sway individuals away from alcohol. And really their whole push for that was in order to promote safety for women, especially in abusive relationships that were often fueled by alcohol. Right? So that's kind of the push of the temperance movement during this time. Let's see. Yeah, and this actually kind of created this center of gravity for feminism that will develop over the next couple generations as we get into the discussion of suffrage. But so if you are looking at this picture here, this is Carrie Nation. If you're not familiar, she is probably the most well-known organizer of the temperance movement. She, and as you can see right here in this picture, she's holding a hatchet. She and other women would go into bars and saloons, and this included even here in Oklahoma. In Guthrie, for example, she burst in with her hatchet and started attacking the bar and destroyed part of the bar. But that was kind of what these women did. They went in with hatchets and, destroyed property. She gave tours across the country and funded her transportation by selling, they were little copper hatchet pins. So that funded her travels, which is pretty awesome. If you are ever in Guthrie and go to the Oklahoma Territorial Museum, they have part of the Bluebell Saloon's bar, not the specifically damaged section, but part of the actual Bluebell Saloon bar, which is where Carrie Nation went in. And then they also have one of her pins that were for sale that she used for funding. Anyway, there's more than you need to know about Carrie Nation, but she is a fascinating person to me. So, all right, so we have a picture of Carrie Nation. And then this next image is 3 cartoons of our temperance pioneers going in and destroying this property. So I wanted to show you guys that, but also the reason I want to look at this image is because the representation that we see here, this was depicted as being a movement of Caucasian women, which going back just a couple of minutes ago, we knew that this is not the case. There were equal groups being organized by women of color that were maybe not going in and vandalizing property, but having the same message out there. So anyway, okay. All right, so those are things that were happening, like stateside during the 1890s. And this all plays into the bigger picture. All right. Now let us look at becoming a world power. All right. So America was a second-rate power in the 1880s. And in the 1890s, there is a push to change this, to get more territories out there in the world under U.S. control. All right, so there's a push for territorial expansion. All right. Okay, so after 1870, European powers, along with Japan, scrambled to dominate Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. So our imperialism. So this was justified as bringing civilization, quote unquote, to supposedly backwards peoples who were not backwards, they're just non-European, okay? Alrighty, so territorial expansion had always been a part of American life. You can go, coming over to the Western Hemisphere to begin with is an expansionist act, okay? Then from there, moving to the Mississippi, then to the West Coast, then moving beyond our borders, okay? So it's always been part of our national narrative. It all goes back to the idea of manifest destiny. But anyway, so it's very ingrained in the American story. Okay. All right, that reiterates what I just said, basically. We've always been doing this, but the 1890s really marked this turning point. And a lot of this had to do with, it's all possession, depending on how you look at, or regardless of how you look at it. But it was justified as people wanting to expand trade, not wanting territorial possessions. Okay. So, I kind of skipped through this a little bit, but Hawaii is annexed in 1898, which shows this expansion. Okay, and then let us skip to the Splendid Little War. Okay, so. Alrighty, if you are following with me in the book, we're on 532 in the 6th edition. Okay, so let's talk about Cuba. Alrighty, so Cuba had fought for independence since 1868. And so the U.S. goes to war with Spain with the declared purpose of winning Cuba's liberty and freedom as defined by the U.S. Okay. This is where, if you ever hear the story of Roosevelt and his Rough Riders taking San Juan Hill. This is a major battle. Sends Teddy Roosevelt becomes a national hero. He's then elected governor of New York, which will aid in his presidential campaign soon enough. Okay, and then, okay, so 5th edition, you are looking at page 536, and 6th edition, you're looking at 533, but I would like for you all to look at these maps of the Spanish-American War. So you can see what was going on in the Pacific and then also in the Caribbean, because this was a two-pronged operation. Okay, so you can take your time and look at that. Alrighty. So in the treaty that ended the war, the U.S. acquired the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And this reopened immigration for Chinese immigrants, okay? Am I terrible if I skip that? No, I will not. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let us look at the Philippine War. So many believe that the American participation in the destruction of Spanish rule would lead to social reform and political self-government. So the U.S. is trying to impose this in the Philippines, and there is resistance, all right? This is Emilio Aguinaldo, who led that resistance, fighting against American colonialism. And the McKinley administration justified U.S. intervention in the Philippines on the grounds that they were, again, this is just the same thing that's, being said everywhere they seem to go, but the aim was to, quote, uplift and civilize and Christianize the Filipinos. All right, so then you can look at a map. Okay, so yeah, this map shows the expansion of the American Empire. So you can look at that on your own time. Alrighty, so let's look at the section. Okay, that does exist. All right, so citizens or subjects. American rule brought American racial attitudes, which is not surprising. And America's entry into the ranks of imperial powers sparked debate over the relationship between political democracy, race, and citizenship, compared to our territories versus those on the mainland. All right, so which discussions of freedom and citizenship, those shift throughout the ages. So this is just another iteration of that. And the Foraker Act in 1900 declared Puerto Rico an insular territory, which was different from previous territories. And basically what it meant was that citizens of Puerto Rico remained Puerto Rican, not American, which is what is different about how this model compared to others. And because of that, Puerto Rico is then denied a future route to statehood. Again, straying away from their previous models where all territories, the point of them was to get enough people there to then become a state. All right, so this was blocked. Okay, so let's look at the other territories of this time. Alrighty, so Hawaii achieves its statehood in 1959. The Philippines receives independence in 1946, and Puerto Rico is still considered the world's oldest colony today. Okay, so kind of wrapping things up here. So drawing the global color line, American racial attitudes had a global impact in the age of empire. Okay, kind of setting the tone. So Canada followed suit with the Chinese Exclusion Act. They had similar provisions, and then similar patterns of segregation also root themselves in Australia and South Africa and will last generations. But so that just shows issues that the U.S. was having that then spread to the rest of the world. So, okay, that is where Chapter 17 leaves off. And, okay, so Chapter 18, we start with the Progressive Era. It goes from 1900 to World War I, okay? So I will get Chapter 18's lecture up and going for you guys. I think that's it for right now. Let me know if you have any questions about anything. I'm around. Okay, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Bye.